of our conflict and labor union chapter in our human relations course. I'm Professor Jessica. Welcome. Our topics today are number 1, to identify your conflict handling style. There's 5. 2, to address advantages, disadvantages, and situations where each conflict handling style might be used. And thirdly, implement strategies for effective conflict management. So the Thomas Kilmann conflict handling styles, we have 5 of them, and they vary from sort of passive and avoidant to not really caring, to sort of full-on aggressive and everything in between, including collaboration and compromising. So if we start sort of on the flip side of things, we can look at both the competing and the accommodating, and they are essentially 2 sides of the same coin. So for the competing conflict style, this is when a person would completely sort of run the other party over. It's very competitive, it's confrontational, sometimes aggressive, where the person in charge, or the person we're looking at, the target, says that I want to win at all costs and I don't care about what happens to you. The accommodating style is the complete opposite. This is when the person, the target, we can call him or her or them, accommodates to the other party. And so in this conflict style, you give in to the other person's needs, their wishes, etc. So it's I choose to lose in this situation and I let you win. So the competing conflict style might be used in a work situation where there's a crisis. And so we are pointing with the whole hand and we're telling people exactly what to do because we need to move quickly. The accommodating style might be used when there's a situation where we don't really care that much. It doesn't really matter to us. And so we might as well let the other person have what they want, right? So we use these conflict handling styles in different situations. Then we have the avoiding, which we just passively withdraw from the situation, right? We are not engaged at all and we are avoiding it completely. And we're essentially going to say that I don't see a conflict, right? And that might be troublesome if the person really perceives you as not caring, and that might have implications for the relationship. So those 3 that we've talked about up to this point are not really ideal for compromising or collaborating, right? So in the next 2 conflict management styles, we are now trying to solve the situation more successfully. So while the compromising style is one that is typically advocated, it's not the best one. Because in the compromising style, both people get a little bit, but they also give up some. So I win some and you win some, which means that we're both leaving things on the table that we really wanted. So while this is an effective conflict style to maintain our relationships, neither of us are going to get exactly what we want. But it's maybe better than avoiding the situation altogether. In our collaborating style, we are both working together so that both of us get exactly what we need. And this style is the most time and resource consuming because it takes typically a little bit more effort to reach a solution where everybody involved is happy. And so this style is beneficial in most situations because we spend that time discussing what is really going on, the underlying issue, which means we will have a better handle on the conflict and so we can solve it more productively. Then we are moving on to what's in it for me, right? Why do we even care about this? Well, obviously, we want to know our conflict handling style because that impacts how we actually handle conflict in our personal life, in our work life. And also knowing this can give us some ideas about how to better manage conflict. And we can think of these 5 conflict management styles as tools, right? So for different situations, you use different tools. When you have more time and you truly care about the relationship, you want to collaborate and make sure that everybody's happy. If it's more time urgent, maybe a compromise is wise, even though not ideal, but for that situation, it could work. Again, where it's a minor thing, you might just withdraw, perhaps just communicating that it's not in your interest to pursue, so the other person knows where you're coming from and why you're doing it. Competing, if we're quick on time, there's an urgency, there's a crisis, we might not even want to, or I mean, have the time, even though we want to, take other people's needs and wishes into consideration. So in those situations, we might just compete and decide. And accommodating, right? If we don't really care that much and it's a really an important thing or a great need for the person on the other side of the table, then we might want to accommodate. So here is a quick self-assessment that you can do to find out your preferred conflict management style, knowing that most of the time we want to use them in different situations. So you might have a preferred one, but might not be the right one. Okay, so when we are managing conflict, the main idea here is to actually identify our needs. What are the needs in the situation? And you heard me say needs on the prior slide. And needs are more important to identify than your wants, because wants, they come and they go, but needs are foundational and they need to be met. So asking things such as, what is critical here? Why is it critical? This helps us better understand our own needs, and others who are in the situation, they will understand why we are asking for something. So given that we want to identify our own needs, we also, of course, want to identify the needs of the other person, because if we do that, then we can hopefully satisfy everyone's needs. So we start out by self-reflecting and identifying our own needs. And once we have done that, in step number 2, we move on to identify the needs of the other person who is in this disagreement. And we can ask questions such as, what are you concerned about? What has worked for you before? Tell me your reasons for wanting that. What do you think about this, maybe? And if you had a choice, what direction would you go in and why? So these are some starter questions that might help you identify maybe also your needs if you ask them of yourself, and then the other person needs. So framing questions in this way can help us get to the root of the conflict, which makes a solution so much easier to achieve. So when we are trying to resolve a conflict, the process is that we want to first identify the conflict or the disagreement. Because truth of the matter is that a lot of the time we are actually in agreement, meaning that we have the same goal or we have the same objective. But the real disagreement is just how we want to go about doing it, right? So we have different ways of working, different approaches, or different paths. So first of all, we're going to identify that we have a disagreement. Second of all, we will determine what our common goal is. And once we know that we actually have the same goal, which we typically do, things become much easier. So in step number 3, after we have identified the conflict and determined the common goal or goals, we are now brainstorming ideas on how to get to that common goal. So now we are actually collaborating and working together instead of fighting. So in step number 4, once we know how we can get to the goal, we are determining the action steps needed to get there. And then we do sort of role assignment in number 5. We are addressing each party's responsibilities in meeting the goal. So what are you doing and what am I doing to make sure we get to the goal? There are some other things to think about when we want to have a conflict resolution. So here are some other tips to take into consideration. We want to make sure that we listen to the other party, and not just superficially listen, but actually listen to them to understand what their needs are. We want to avoid saying things like you never or you always, because that will disenfranchise people, and they're not really true. There is never, never, and there is never always, right? Finding the interests or the needs of everybody involved so we can meet them, working together and avoiding judging each other. If we have strong feelings, we want to make sure that we respectfully share them with each other. And of course, being willing to listen to other people's feelings, even though you might not disagree with them. And it might be difficult because it's a high emotion situation. But willingness to do that will help us get to a solution. And sometimes we need somebody to mediate or facilitate this conversation for us. If somebody is having an emotional outburst, it's important to not really react to it with anger or frustration or irritation, but maybe say something like, it looks like you're feeling a little bit emotional today. Maybe we can talk about this in a moment. Maybe we'll take a break, you can have a glass of water, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. And always try to understand the other person's perspective or side, and that will help us move things along. So for exercise, take the conflict style assessment that I talked about a couple of slides ago. And then after you have done that, answer each of the following. So for A, what is your preferred conflict management style? And then B, what is your least preferred one, the one you use the least? C, give an example of when you have used your preferred style in the past and how did it go? And for D, identify 3 strategies that you can implement to work on utilizing your least preferred conflict management style so you can practice using that one. And in E, use the steps identified in this section, the earlier steps. Outline each step and how you might use it to better resolve the conflict that you identified earlier up in C. So with that, in summary, there are 5 main styles of handling conflict, and all of them have advantages and disadvantages. The 5 styles are competing, accommodating, avoiding, compromising, and collaborating. Identifying interests, needs is an important aspect of resolving conflict, and there are 5 steps to reducing conflict or to conflict resolution, which can be implemented to reduce any existing conflict and come to more of a win-win situation. So with that, thank you so much and see you next time.